Warren.
Okay, so you ready?
Yep.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Warren Redlick. I'm here with Arthur Kanegis. I hope I got it right, Arthur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and this is going to be a little different than our normal videos. We're not going to talk about Tesla, SpaceX, the Boring Company, or Neuralink, or tech companies. Arthur is the director and producer of a documentary called The World Is My Country. It is about a man named Garry Davis and a movement or community of people. I did watch it. And I'm going to just do a quick share screen and show you a couple of clips from this flick. Excuse me, flick. I'm sorry.
I like it. I like it.
Let's see. Oh, okay. So
we're not getting audio. You have to also click share audio in Zoom. You have to share video and audio. Unshare and share again, sharing both.
All right. Maybe I did this wrong, folks. Hang on a second. Can I even find my...
Go down to the bottom to share screens, cancel sharing, and now unshare, and then
Stop share. Okay, hang on a second.
Now reshare, and you'll see a little button where you click on to say share sound as well.
Oh man, you're good at this. Okay, let's try this again. I'm sorry, this is hilarious for me. Okay, everybody, please be patient with me. Let's see if I can get this right.
Garry Davis.
Who, me?
There we go. Now we hear
We're
it.
about to hear from an everyday man with an extraordinary life story.
Okay, that was one. And then...
For 65 years, as a citizen of no nation, only the world, Garry Davis made his own props of freedom, demonstrating that we, the people, can tear down the walls of oppression and write our own story. We can build a world that is constructive for all and destructive to none.
Okay, I lost Arthur there for a second.
I'll be right back. I'm just grabbing something to drink while you're playing our...
Okay. Well, while he's getting something to drink, I'll show off my my merch. I'd like to thank the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden, all my Patreon supporters. Please support the channel on Patreon, link below.
Now you get to see my T-shirt.
Yes,
the world is my country. We have those on our website.
Right. So for those who are watching, this is a documentary. The documentary actually came out in 2014. Am I correct?
No, the first version of it was released at the Minneapolis International Film Festival in 2018, I believe it was 17 or 18. But then we just had a new television version that we released this year, a 58-minute version that's been playing on public television stations coast to coast.
Okay, so I got to see the full movie version thanks to Eileen Proctor, who suggested I interview you. Can you just, I'm going to show a couple more clips soon, but could you just tell the audience a bit more, what is this film about? Okay,
so it's about a remarkable character. Here he was a song and dance man on Broadway. It's kind of about a song and dance man on a mission to save the world. And what happened is he stood in for Danny Kaye on Broadway when he was just a young man, 20 years old or so, and he got 13 curtain calls. People couldn't believe this young kid could do Danny's rapid fire numbers. This was back in the golden age of Broadway.
Sorry for my young audience. Danny Kaye was a great actor.
He was a humorous actor, and he used great body language, and people couldn't believe and so that this young kid wowed people with Danny's double talk numbers when Danny had laryngitis, just blew people away, and he was on his way to a Broadway career. He had offers of new shows, and he had even the beginnings of television was happening, and they offered him to have an audition for that as well. And then boom, World War II comes along, and he finds himself in a bomber plane ordered to bomb the city of Brandenburg. And his own brother has just been killed in the war, and he's all torn apart. He says, why weren't the people who killed my brother arrested? Why aren't I being arrested for bombing people in their homes and schools and factories just because they're on the wrong side of some invisible line I can't see from the air? And he gets back from the war, and his friends are all in idle conversation, but he's torn up about this. It's what nowadays we would call PSD. And he sees the footage of Hiroshima, And he says, my God, I'm still in the active reserve. What if I'm recalled to bomb Moscow in a war that would end the human race? This is insane. So he says, I've got to do something about it. And he goes on a search for quest what to do. And he realizes something amazing. Inside countries with one government, we don't fight wars. Humanity's already invented a system that eliminates war. We may have crimes, but we handle it as a criminal justice system. Even an act of terrorism, like when Tim McVeigh blew up the federal building, Oklahoma didn't declare war or drop bombs on Michigan for harboring the Michigan militia. It's handled as a criminal justice problem. And he said, if we can just do that in the world, if we can just create world law, we can solve it. But I'm not, a lawyer. I'm not how would I do something? Well, he gets this ingenious idea. He goes to Paris. This is back in 1948, where the UN hasn't been built yet on the East River. And so they're meeting there in Paris, the UN General Assembly. And he pulls off this grand act of political theater. He leaps up in the middle of the assembly and he says, the nations you represent divide us and lead us to the brink of total war. And he calls on the delegates to hold elections of a government of, by, and for the people of the planet. Well, amazingly, the delegates actually start applauding him. But of course, he's not allowed to do that, so he's hauled away. But this just rivets war-weary Europe. People are so sick of the war, and to see this, gutsy little American do this, 20,000 people rally with him at the Velodrome. Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, even Einstein. Einstein says this is the guy with the key for whether humanity will continue to exist or on the planet.
Sorry, just really quick for my audience. Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre were brilliant French thinkers of that time period.
Yeah, they were some of the leading intellectuals, and then Simone de Beauvoir. You probably know more of these people than I do, but they really all rallied around this. And the incredible thing is that the Soviet Union had been adamantly objecting to Eleanor Roosevelt's proposal for a universal declaration of human rights. But when they had this huge rally on December 9th, the very next day, the Soviet Union changed their mind, abstained, and let the Universal Declaration of Human Rights get passed unanimously. Now, Garry says in the film, we'll never know why, but on December 9th, we took over. We, the people, demanded that we need our human rights at a world level. And for the first time, all the nations in the world, at least officially, recognized that everybody on Earth has rights and freedoms. Now, it hasn't always been honored, but at least it's the first step in building world law. So Garry had an incredible impact. The story goes on. It's just every turn, it's a twist and turn of amazing facts. But it actually helped also inspire the leaders who created the European Union, who did bring down those borders that had divided the countries and it caused 2 world wars. And since that union, whatever problems it had, since the European Parliament was created, no European nations fought a war against another European nation. They've had civil wars, they've had outside wars, but their actual disputes went to court, not to war. And so that's what Garry says is the key for our planet, both for war and for the environment, is for us to create world law from the bottom up, we the people.
Okay, so for those who are watching or are used to the technology content, we are going to take this to Mars at some point. But let me just give you a couple more clips that relate to what we were just talking about. Let me try to share screen again. I think we're good. So this...
My brother Buddy, he chooses the Navy. While I'm in training, his tin can destroyer is blown to bits at Salerno. That's a shock. It's a shock I hope you never have. A member of your family gets killed in war.
So, and this is what you just talked about with Brandenburg, I think.
Later, when I'm flying over Germany in a B-17, and we were ordered to bomb Brandenburg. We did, 5 miles up, and then we go home, and then we saw the pictures. And I was horrified at the destruction, humiliated that I'd been part of it.
And then just one last one, forgive me.
Oh, no, welcome there.
Why weren't we arrested for killing people? Why weren't the Germans who killed you arrested? Those questions My dear brother ate away at me, and they still do.
So you mentioned Hiroshima at one point. I don't know if you know this about me. I lived in Hiroshima for a year.
Wow.
And there's a place, the Peace Park. I don't know if, have you been to Hiroshima, Japan?
No, I haven't personally. I'd love to.
There's a building, in Japanese, it's Genbaku Domo, A-bomb dome. It's a building that survived the bomb, not well, but it survived. And living, so I've been to, I lived in Hiroshima. I've been in the museum. It's a very powerful, moving experience. I've been to the cemetery in Normandy that people saw in Saving Private Ryan. War is getting that, minimal experience of war. It's nothing like actually being in war, but getting that minimal experience of war, seeing the number of graves in Normandy was just overwhelming. And I think we all agree that war is bad, but we don't seem to be able to end it. And even with everything that Garry did, we're bombing 8 countries right now. The United States is bombing 8 countries. I feel, I appreciate what he did. I would actually turn it to a different question. One of the things that, if you watch the documentary, one of the things that you guys really accomplished was this concept of a world passport. Most people aren't aware of this. There are people living in refugee camps. There are people in all kinds of circumstances who have no papers, right? They get to a border, they want to enter a country, and they can't because they don't have any papers, and the bureaucrats at the border don't know how to process you. But with the world passport, and was it 600,000 people or 2 million people now have this passport?
Yeah, it was something that has actually been stamped by over 95% of the world's nations at some time or another. But now it's getting much more difficult since 9/11, and many nations won't allow it now. But in the past, people have used it widely to travel, and it's also been even currently very much used for an identity document. For example, even if you get into the U.S. to have your asylum case heard, you can't even get into the courthouse without an ID. So some of the immigration lawyers will send their clients over to the World Service Authority to get a world passport, so at least they can get in, or they can open a bank account, or they can get their kids medical care, or in school. You need identity for almost everything these days in the world. And people who are stateless, over 50 million people, and have no identity at all, it's a crucial lifeline to get these world passports, world IDs, world birth certificates, all based on elements of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that guarantees our right to an identity and to travel and so on.
So I want the audience to understand, this is hard things to grasp, because like most of my audience is probably like me, middle class or wealthy, living in a rich country. Our lives are relatively easy. There are people in the world that have problems we can't even begin to imagine. And I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary. For anybody who's interested, there's a documentary on PBS Frontline called Exodus, and I think there's 2 of them, but the first one's the one I liked better, which documents a bunch of refugees fleeing from Africa and the Middle East coming to Europe, and the difficulties they had to overcome to get out of their country and get into Europe. And we sort of take travel for granted. We're just used to it. And just get in line. Well, yeah, if everyone in your country is experiencing extreme hardship, just get in line is not really a compelling concept. So this idea of having this world passport that allows you to travel, I am among my friends, among the people that I travel with, I have a very simple view. I believe in open borders. This is tangential maybe to the world citizen concept, but to me, it's just like, I don't believe that I have a natural right to stop Jose from crossing the border from Mexico into the United States. And if the government derives its powers from the people, if I don't have the power to tell him he can't come in here, then I can't give my government the power to tell him he can't come in here. So this concept of a government having the power to keep people from crossing borders is just manufactured. Do you see where I'm coming from on that?
Absolutely. And the thing about it, people will say, oh, but then if we did that, we'd be flooded with immigrants. But the reason why we'd be flooded with immigrants is because we've destabilized, the United States government, unfortunately, has worked on behalf of the corporate interests, not the people, to overthrow governments throughout Latin America that have tried to democratize and improve the life of their people. They wouldn't be coming over here. They'd love to stay home. If these foreign policies and if these broken system of borders and of nations wasn't forcing them to destroy the very infrastructure that their lives depend on. So the incredible thing about Garry's solution of creating world law of, by, and for the people of the planet is that it eliminates the problems that they're caused. We don't have to have refugees storming into our country. I mean, look, inside the U.S., there are no borders between states.
Wow.
Well, why don't all the people just all run to the state with the best benefits?
Well, to be fair, I think the people from California are fleeing to Texas, and the people from New York are fleeing to Florida right now.
Well, wherever they're fleeing, it seems.
But they're not fleeing. They're not fleeing to benefits. They're fleeing the oppression of public health.
Well,
right.
But the thing is that the more we have freedom and we have guarantee of our basic rights, the more we can eliminate these problems before they become a great oppression and before they become floods of refugees and war and the suicide of our planet. I mean, the scary thing right now is rattling the sabers of a new Cold War with Russia and China. I mean, that could be the end of humanity. So and of all species on Earth. So we do have a responsibility, as you said, to recognize what Garry called the sovereignty of the whole. It's not just our individual sovereignty, but joining together with others, we become what it says in the Constitution. It says, I mean, the Declaration of Independence says it's the right of the people to institute new government. And so Garry says, well, there's no government at the world level, just a wide open, marvelous opportunity, he says, for me to go out and declare it. So he says, so I went up to Maine where my father was born, I was born. And I said to my dad, Dad, I'm going to declare a government, by and for the people. The craziest notion I ever heard of. People don't go around declaring governments. Why, they'll laugh you off the stage, especially in Maine. And Garry said, well, my audience isn't really the people of Maine. It's the people of the future in the world. So he says, so I declared this government of, by, and for the people. He kind of laughs. I mean, who am I to do it? But what did they mean when they said it's the right of the people to institute new government? Old guys in gray wigs.
Right. Just let me just clarify that in case people missed it, because we're going fast and I saw the documentary and you made the documentary. If people read the Declaration of Independence, the writers of the Declaration of Independence, and this is a founding document of the United States, so you can laugh at it if you want to, but they said it is the right of the people to institute a government, right? Right. Am I close?
Exactly. Whenever it's not fulfilling our needs of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is what's happening, then we have a right to institute a government. And what Garry said is that the great thing at the global level is there's no existing government to overthrow. We don't need a war or revolution. We, the people, have to just get together, not with guns and bombs, but with a new internet-based, talks about a cybernetic system of we, the people, bringing to the top the highest and best wisdom of each individual and amalgamating that with the will of the people of the planet and creating a whole new inventive system of governance. He says humanity is a very inventive species, folks. Let's invent something new.
So let me just address. I'm looking at the comments, and Kay Bingo is somebody I talk to a lot. She has a comment. What if I don't want to be a part of your global government? I'm going to get to that in a minute, Kay. The key point here, a lot of people are afraid, like we just talked about this, we're going to be flooded with refugees. And if people missed it before, our government policies, the US government, the British government, the world powers, we're creating refugees. We're bombing other countries. We're creating conflict. And then that conflict causes refugees to come here. Another thing you didn't mention is we have in the United States, we have workers who come up from, say, Mexico or Honduras or Guatemala, and they do work. And they stay because they're afraid that if they go home, they won't be able to get back in.
Absolutely.
If we have open borders, then they could come up, do some work for growing season. They could pick fruit on the farms when most Americans don't want to do that work. And then when they finish picking fruit, they can go back home with their money and help their local economy. We create a whole bunch of policies that create more refugees, that create more migration problems, all of that. But I want to turn to Kay's point. So to be blunt, I would turn Gary's angle around and say, instead of having one world government, how about having no governments at all? Because what I don't trust with a world government, okay, which is what I don't trust with my own government, is the idea that having a government means we don't have wars and we have laws that protect people. Nazi Germany showed us that's not true. The Soviet Union showed us that's not true. A government can become destructive to its own people. So at least in a world with multiple governments, and I'm a fan of no governments, just to be clear, but at least in a world where the United States has a government, Britain has a government, Russia has a government, China has a government, if you don't like the government and the country where you are, and you have some level of freedom of travel, which I agree with you and Gary, that's something that's guaranteed by the International Declaration of Human Rights, you should be able to leave the country you're in that has a government you don't like and go to a country that has a better system of government. But I wanted to turn that on you and say, if you have one world government, where do you go if the world government turns bad?
Okay, so here's what Gary says about that. He says, does world government scare you? Well, it does me if it's the same old forces of power and money controlling our lives from behind closed doors. And that's kind of what we have right now. I mean, we have these trade agreements that can punish countries for doing environmental acts because they hurt their profits. You know, what's happening is here in the world, the people have no say at the global level. You have never elected anybody, you've never had any say, but the corporations, they're free to act globally. So what happens is originally corporations were under the people. They were in Jefferson's day, they were set up like with a 25-year charter. And if they didn't build a railroad or do the public good, it could be pulled and they'd be out of business. But because we, the people, are locked in these boxes called nation states and they're operating globally, they ended up getting all the power. If you regulate us, we'll go abroad. If you stop our pollution, we'll go abroad. And they gained all the money. They bought the best politicians money could buy. And you know, we the people had only the shell and illusion of democracy when we're kind of under this control. And what he said is, he talked about a completely different form of what we're talking about governance. He talked about that governance should be a service, like, for example, take the Universal Postal Union. It makes sure my letter gets from here to there. Take ICANN, that regulates the domain names. It's a nonprofit governing organization. You can't have the same domain name or the same email address as somebody else. That's a law created, but it's a law that's not enforced by guns and bombs. It's by, you know, a percentage of your fee for whatever domain you have goes for ICANN, and they regulate that. So he talked about a really completely different idea about how we do governance. You know, in the old days, it was like, it was like the king is on top, and then the other people underneath, the other people underneath, or the president's on top, and we have that hierarchical organization chart. He said, what if you make that instead a geodesic sphere, like Bucky Fuller pictured, you know, where you have like two geodesic domes put together? Well, if you take an organization and you use that model, it changes it completely. Like, for example, the president would be on top when it comes to administration, but when it comes to keeping the toilets clean, the janitor would be on top. If the toilets are overflowing and unusable, the whole office shuts down. But he can't do that unless he has supplies from supply. So they're on top. They can't do that without payroll. So payroll's on top. In other words, you can rotate this sphere around, and all of us can be on top of the world in our area. And
doesn't that deny thousands of years of human history, that it always ends up organizing to someone's on top into a hierarchy? And now you've created a one world government where there's somebody who's the president of the world. I mean, every movie we see, every story we see where there's a one world government, someone's on top, they're dictating down below. It always ends up being top down. It always ends up being special interests. But I don't limit it to corporations. There's all kinds of special interests, including the people who get elected become their own special interests as well. And a lot of times I think there's a great book. Peter Schweizer wrote this book called Extortion, which turns the idea of corporate interests bribing government on its head and saying that politicians extort the corporations by threatening them with legislation and getting them to give them money to prevent legislation rather than the other way around, buying legislation. But when you centralize power, you end up with these games get played, and the larger organization you create. So the U.S. government has a lot more corruption than my city government. Right. The larger the government you create, the more corruption you're going to have. So if you have a world government, look, Gary was an idealist, right?
Right.
I think only an idealist could believe that you could create a world government and not become corrupt.
Well,
Right?
what his idea was, and maybe government almost is misleading because it's more governance. It's basically a way. Say we interactively in this new synergistic process that he talked about, where he talked about if you bring people together from opposite viewpoints and you say, who's right and who's wrong, you're just going to fight it out. But say you had these like Zoom type meetings and you're using these techniques to really get at what is it each person wants, what's their inner feelings, what is their goal, what are they like in the future. You start finding people, when you travel to other countries, you start finding people are the same the world over, and that they all want a better life for their children. They all want to have a secure future. And if we start embodying these principles into law, he's saying we don't enforce it with guns, bombs, military power. We enforce it with our people power. You walk into a store, you're shopping, you have an app in your phone, you scan the products. Oh, this company's a world law violator, or this one is supplying element parts for the nuclear weapons that could threaten humanity. I'm not going to buy that product. I'm going to buy this product. Or I go to a website where to apply for a job, and I've signed up as a world citizen, so I have this little app in there that pops up. Oh, this person's a world law violator. This person is doing what's good for the planet.
But so, this sounds like
power, not to enforce the law. And longshoremen won't, or the unions wouldn't. You mentioned unions. Unions wouldn't unload ships with parts for weapons of mass destruction and so on.
But this sounds like the version of anarchism that I believe in. There's a version of, and it sounded like Gary did not like anarchism, but anarchism is painted badly by the propaganda coming from governments. What you're describing is essentially a set of voluntary interactions. No one is forced to do anything. We just decide, if I don't like this product, we as a group decide we're not going to buy this product because we don't like it. That is a voluntary decision. It's when government forces you to not be able to buy a particular product, to control trade, when government forces you to serve in a military. It's always government force. What anarchists reject, and I mean, it's very hard to use the word anarchists and anarchism because it's been demonized for so long. And I asked this question on Twitter the other day. I did a poll: who killed more people in the 20th century, governments or anarchists? But anarchists are always depicted as violent, right? But government killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century, and anarchists killed hundreds.
Here's what Gary says about anarchism. He says anarchism means a situation of no law, and that's what we have in the world. For instance, the reason why, for instance, in Guantanamo, why they built it just outside of U.S. borders is that then the law doesn't apply. Then they could kill people, torture people, whatever they wanted. Gary said inside every country in the world, killing people is illegal, but outside it isn't. I killed people, and I got medals for it. That we have no law, and law basically is a compact of the people. If you go back to the basis of what law is about, it's a compact where we come to an agreement with each other that this is the rules we want to abide by, and then if you don't, like you said, voluntarily, we either won't buy your products, we won't support you, and if you will, we interactively bring people into an understanding of how they can cooperate. So it is similar to the positive kind of anarchism you're talking about, but what he's opposing is the kind of anarchism that's causing all these wars. In other words, the U.S. couldn't be bombing all these countries around the world if we had to follow the law. It's already against the law. The U.S. Constitution says that treaties are this part of the supreme law of the land. There's already a Kellogg-Briand treaty that outlaws war. We're a party to the party, but we violate those all the time. Countries violate the law because they put themselves above the law. What we need is law above the nations that divide us, and the only source of that law that makes sense is to be from the will of the people. Every constitution gives lip service, says it's based on the will of the people. Almost every one. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says it says the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. Gary said, if we're the guys who are giving them this authority, why are we begging and pleading them to fix it? They can't. They're at the wrong, broken, divided level. We, the people, have to just come together as a planet and interactively, create the world we choose and skip these old broken systems that are leading to our doom.
Right. So I just want to, Kevin in the chat said something I was thinking, which is anarchy doesn't mean no laws or no rules. Anarchy means no rulers. No, I think it relates. I don't actually know the origin of the etymology of the word, but I think it relates to hierarchism, right? It means there's nobody above you. There's no one who has power over you. And the fundamental problem with the idea of a world government is as long as there are still governments for nations and those nations have guns and militaries, if the world government doesn't have guns and militaries, it can't enforce its laws. Right. So at some level, you have to decide either we're going to disarm all these countries, which aren't going to do so willingly, or your world government has to become armed and force them to disarm, which now all of a sudden creates the danger that your world government starts abusing its power.
Right. Let me point out something. We think there's power in guns and bombs. Okay, since World War II, the United States has fought numerous wars, dropped numerous bombs. And even though it's the most powerful nation in the entire world, with spending more than half the world on budget on military, even though we have bases all over the world, we have never won a single war. Since World War II, we haven't won a war. We have a broken system that's not working that we think has power.
Well,
power. You just make more enemies.
That assumes the goal was to win the war. If the goal was to feed the defense industry with money from the taxpayer, and if it just happened to kill a few poor slobs in some other country as a consequence, if you think the goal was to actually win a war, then you're right. But if the goal, I think the goals were achieved. The goals were to accumulate more and more power in the hands of government, to take away more and more freedom from the people of the country, to hand out more money to the special interests that support government. Then the wars have been a great success. Well, if you think it was about defeating Vietnam or defeating Afghanistan, of course it wasn't a success, but that was never the goal.
Well, you are absolutely right. And that's, so what happens, Eisenhower gave an incredible talk. Here's the president of the United States, a general, who in his farewell address to the warning gives us a crucial warning. And he says that this power of the military industrial complex is in every state house, every government. And he said it imperils the very fundamentals of our democracy. And he said, what can happen if this grave danger is not eliminated? He said, the worst to be expected would be atomic war. The best would be this: a life of perpetual fear and tension, a burden of arms that defies the capability of this nation or any nation to provide true abundance and happiness for the people of this earth. He says, every gun that is made, every warship launched represents, in the final sense, a theft from those who are hungry and not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. And here's this president giving this warning, and then President Kennedy saying, the weapons of war must be abolished or they'll abolish us. And we didn't heed these warnings. In fact, Kennedy kind of got off.
How much were they saying? How much were these leaders saying these things to placate an audience rather than that they seriously believed what they were saying?
Eisenhower didn't need to placate an audience. He was ending his presidency. It was the end. It was a warning because he had experienced this. And I think you're absolutely right. That is what's happened. And we're in this illusion that this military power is somehow making us more secure. Every time we bomb other countries, we get less secure. We create more terrorists, more people that want to kill us. Every time the United States is successful in the world and doing beautiful, positive things, everybody wants to rally behind us. They want to support us. They want our clothes and our culture and our blue jeans, everything, whatever. But we have to. It is exactly what you said. It's a broken system that pretends that's a way of creating security. It's not. And we, the people, have to come together and rise above it because, and I don't think we need to do it with guns and bombs. They're the weak force. We need the strong force. The strong force is our people power. The strong force is our nonviolent action, direct action. We're the strong force. And the only reason they pretend to be the strong force is because they keep us divided and opposing each other and fighting each other so that they can keep their, as you said, keep their money coffers flowing. But if we, the people, really come together as a people, we are the superpower that can save our world.
So I want to talk about Mars in a minute, but you just triggered something in me that I want to address as well. Like you said something earlier. I get these conversations on my channel with the chat. There's a YouTube chat going on while we're talking, and YouTube comments, and I frequently get comments like China's the enemy, the CCP is the enemy, Russia's the enemy. And you see this in the propaganda. And I think fundamentally there is this propaganda machine that is not just the United States, right? There's a propaganda machine in every country. And there's this propaganda machine. So I've traveled quite extensively in my life. I've lived in Japan for a year. I've been to South Korea. I've traveled over a fair chunk of Europe. I've been in the Caribbean. I've been briefly to Mexico. I've met people from all over the world. I feel like we're all pretty much the same. Our DNA is simple. You take me and somebody on the opposite side of the world, our DNA, the DNA from people in Florida and people in India is more similar. There's fewer differences between us than there are internally in the populations. We all have different things that we want, right? I like eating hamburgers, you like eating hot dogs, but we all love to eat. We all like to hang out with friends and make new friends. And there's exceptions. There are people who are introverts, but tends to be these universal things that we all want. We want to shop, we want to eat, we want to meet the right person to spend a lot of time with. We want to meet friends to spend time. We want to drink alcohol or smoke, whatever.
We want to have fun, but we also want to make a difference in the world. We want to help each other. Incredible.
We want to find meaning.
Goes on, meaning in life, right?
And we have these governments in every country, to some extent, who are constantly telling us that country's the enemy. Those people, I think what was it? The submarines were the enemy. You're killing submarines, not people. They're demonizing the Chinese. They're demonizing the Russians. The Russians are probably demonizing us. And the reality is, every Russian I've ever met and I had a neighbor who's from Russia. I have another neighbor who's from Russia. I've got neighbors from Paraguay, Venezuela, whatever. Everybody I meet from all these other countries, they all seem like nice people, with exceptions, right? There's always somebody you don't like,
right?
But they keep telling us how those guys are the bad guys, and the reality is, whoever I've said this on my channel or on YouTube or something like that. That the people at the top who are telling us those people are the enemy. No, the greatest enemy of the American people is Washington, D.C., and that has been true for 200 years.
Well, I think that you're right that it's this creation of enemies, and then look at first, Germany and Japan, they were our big enemy. Then they were our friend. When the Soviet Union fell and the Berlin Wall fell, we were supposed to usher in an era of peace and justice, of having a great economy, of the world coming together. And these guys were scared. I mean, how are we going to keep the coffers going? And they had these 2-bit wars where we fought Panama, we fought Grenada. Well, that wasn't enough to sustain an industry. We need something new. So first, and this came out in some of the papers from the White House, there were proposals, let's make China the new enemy. And the Walmart crowd said, no, let's not do that. And then they came out with this brilliant idea, the war on terror. The more you fight it, the more you create terrorists, the more, and so it was a brilliant marketing strategy. It never ends. It creates its own, it's a self-fulfilling industry. And we have this huge industry of the war on terror. And now we have this huge industry on refugees, the whole border industrial complex, and the money made on that, and all the jails, the jail industrial complex. And, we create these false fears, or we don't really create them. The powers that make money on it create them, and then we fall for it. And we're told this enemy and that enemy. And so you're absolutely right. The people aren't the enemy, and the only way we're going to overcome this is not by lobbying Congress, trying to persuade Congress. As Garry said, why do we keep knocking our heads on the wall, trying to convince people in these fictions? I mean, these are lines drawn on a map. The cities are real. If you look at the world from at night, you'll see all the cities glowing and so on. But these borders, as they saw in Europe, they took them down after a while. I mean, and what happened? They didn't have a catastrophe from it. I mean, they're lines drawn on maps, and they fight wars over them. It's almost like kids on a playground. We'll draw this line. If you step over that, I'll beat you up. Now you're the bad guy. Oh no, you're on this side of the line. Now you're on my side. I mean, it's an insanity. And I think the only hope is for we, the people of the planet, to come together and create something more powerful, and not with the weak force, guns and bombs, that's the last thing we need. That just makes more enemies. But with our economic power, with our moral power, with, when law is working, it's when people feel like it's serving them and people obey it. Most of us will stop at red lights, and not because it's oppressing us, but because this keeps our society working well, and we don't want to get killed smashing through one. So law has a power.
I mentioned propaganda, and what I feel like is what you're saying, what you and Gary are saying is great. And I think if we could all agree that we go forward in this direction, then we can just disregard all these governments and they have no power, because we've all said we don't listen to you anymore. The problem is that there's an awful lot of people. Propaganda works. The propaganda is done for a reason, because it works. And there's an awful lot of people who fall for the propaganda. I mean, I will relate it to another. I don't know. The guy Rahm Emanuel?
No.
Rahm Emanuel was like White House chief of staff. He was mayor of Chicago. There was this interview with the Wall Street Journal where he said, you never let a crisis go to waste, because it lets you're able to do things you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And there's a corollary to that, which is manufacture as many crises as you can, because then you can do whatever you want. And I look at the current public health crisis, and I would say from very early on, I started to doubt the story we were being told. Not to say that the virus isn't real. The virus is real. It is dangerous to the elderly. There are certain things about it that are true, but then they leverage it and they start telling stories that are very clearly not true. Like a current popular story is it's dangerous to children. And they keep beating this drum. The scientific evidence from the very beginning has been, it's very dangerous to the elderly. And look, I'm concerned about vaccinations, but my mother, I make my mother's medical decisions, and she got vaccinated because I said yes. So I'm not saying that all vaccines are bad, or even that this vaccine is bad for all people, but injecting a 12-year-old with an experimental vaccine when we know that 12-year-olds are not in danger from the virus, and having public health officials openly stating that this is dangerous to children when we flat out know it's not. And it's manufacturing one crisis after another. It's almost like Trump being president was a crisis.
Right.
Trump's whole presidency was a crisis that justified extreme measures. George Floyd dying. Police killed innocent people before, right? There all of a sudden, and there have been problems with police before, and it's like everything is a crisis to be manufactured and exaggerated in order to justify some extreme measure. And I find this really striking. What do you see?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's an incredible book by David Swanson, who it's called "War is a Lie," and he shows how every single war was started with a lie. It's not, and humans don't naturally go to war. For Vietnam, it was the manufactured Tonkin Bay incident. For Iran, they made up that babies were being pulled off incubators and tortured or whatever. They always make up something to rev us up and to get us going in these wars. And I think you're right. They scare up some money. I mean, that's what these interviews do. They scare up money. And you look at the incredible article that came out in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, where they show that the virus really, they don't draw a conclusion, but if you read the article, the conclusion's unmistakable that it did start at the Wuhan lab, and that the U.S. had a contract there that Fauci authorized, that was for what they call gain of function, to try to find how you can make viruses even more viral. I don't think it was purposely escaped, or you wouldn't have let it loose in Wuhan, where the pink finger will be pointed. It would have been taken somewhere else. But I think it was an accidental escape from the lab of this science out of control that's only happening because government funds these insane projects that don't serve us any don't do any good for humanity.
Yeah. So I look at all this. Let's turn to Mars for a second. We've got this idea of some form of world government, and no borders. People can go wherever they want to go. We don't have decisions made by guns. How does this extend to the moon and Mars? If we establish colonies on the moon and Mars, does the principle extend to that? How would that work?
Well, I mean, that's very interesting concept. I think that we have a long way to go, but I would hope that whatever we evolve would be something where people are involved, where we don't bring the same old problems that happened here on Earth there, and have new factions and new wars, and blow up and destroy another planet. We're doing a bad enough job on this one. I think that rather than trying to terraform as it imposed other planets, we need to fix our own environment, and we can do it. Every single problem humanity is facing and the world is facing, we have solutions to it. They're just being blocked by these broken political systems that are taking us in the wrong direction. And once we unleash the power of the people to really fix these things, and to put to put the priorities in the right place, we can help our own planet survive and thrive. We don't have to dump this one and try to find another one, because we're not going to have much luck with that.
So let me just turn that on you, because we talked about that before we came on live. I want to be clear, because I'm a big Elon Musk supporter. I got my Elon stainless water bottle, elonbits.com, if anybody's interested. And I want to thank Patreon. Please support this channel on Patreon, and thank the Vasa Law Firm for its support. I have these supporters in the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden. 1% of my subscribers, 1% of my audience is in Sweden, but the Vasa Law Firm just really loves the channel. So
cool.
Elon Musk is doing a lot for this planet. He's promoting electric cars. He's promoting solar energy. He's promoting batteries to make solar and wind more viable. He's working on Neuralink to cure brain disease. He's working on the Boring Company to solve soul-crushing traffic, which if you solve traffic, then you have fewer cars sitting there, idling, spewing fumes without getting somewhere. It makes transportation. This actually relates to the concept of open borders or a free world. I believe that Elon Musk and the Boring Company and SpaceX and everything, they're going to lower the cost of transportation in terms of getting people from point A to point B on the planet, from one country to another, in terms of getting goods from one place to another on the planet. All of these things improve the economic efficiency of the planet, or I like to say it improves the efficiency of the simulation, on the theory that this is all the simulation, but that's a little half joke. But when we have governments and borders, it interferes with this free movement. And can you just tell the audience a little bit about this concept of I believe we all have an inherent right to travel. We all have an inherent right to go from point A to point B. I mentioned it to you earlier. I don't have the right to stop Jose at the border. So my government can't, I don't have the moral or natural right to stop Jose from crossing into this country from Mexico. So I can't give my government that power. But what's your take on I think it's the International Declaration of Human Rights, this idea that we're free to travel? Where does that come from?
Well, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says in Article 13b, it is the right of each person to leave their country and return to their own. That you can travel, you can go where you want, and you can come back to your home, and that is a fundamental right, as you said, and it's being violated by countries all over the world. I think that that relates to just what we're talking about. That what you said about people. I mean, I happen to live here, and I'm in Baja, an hour south of San Diego, on the beach, and I see firsthand the incredible suffering caused by this broken border system, and the families torn apart, and the people who can't be with their loved ones. And we had living at our home a woman whose kids were ripped from her arms when they were babies, and she was sent away because her work permit had expired, and she had to wait for her kids are growing up, and she's only seeing them on Skype and Zoom. She can't get back to see her own children. And we have just it's heartbreaking story after story. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it's the whole dysfunctional system causing the problem, and then trying to solve it with another broken system.
I think
caused, as you said, by this broken system, and then we're trying to solve it by an even more broken system.
Yeah,
so we got to rise above that.
I think for the audience, there's a lot of people in the audience who struggle, and just people in general that I talk to who struggle with this concept. People have no idea about the inhumanity of border controls. They don't until you cross a border the wrong way, and you can even cross a border the right way and experience it. People have no concept of how much inhumanity happens at our board, not just our borders, at Europe's borders, at other countries' borders. And people just sort of say, well, it has to be that way. No, it doesn't have to be that way. And if it wasn't that way, people believe, well, if we didn't have this border system, then all these magical problems would happen and everything would blow up. And like the United States, I don't even know if you know this. Oh, and somebody asked, who's Kanegis? Kanegis, right? Arthur Kanegis is the director and producer of the documentary The World Is My Country, which you can see the background. TheWorldIsMyCountry.com is the website for the film. Check it out. Do you want to give yourself a little bit of other props? What else have you done besides this film, Arthur?
Right. Well, I was okay. So I started out of after I graduated from high school and college. I worked for the American Friends Service Committee, making early documentaries. Even before we had home video, we did them on slide tape documentaries on the Vietnam War and and exactly what you're talking about, the military-industrial complex, the corporations who were profiting from this war. And we had in it, for example, a scene where we had a program in Quang Ngai where we built artificial limbs for kids whose legs had been blown off from the bombs. And we showed this kid whose leg had been blown off, and we showed how that was part of a purposeful strategy of they called it area denial, that if you maim people, you can tie up 6 or 7, 8 people. Rather, if you kill them, you just tie up one. So they were purposely maiming these kids and everything and then we have, you look at the part number on the mine that blew up his leg, and it's a Westinghouse mine, and we have this ad, you can be sure of it's Westinghouse. And this
that's awful. Oh my God, that's awful. I'm sorry I laughed.
It was the truth. It is awful, but it was the truth. And people, and so this was very effective. People saw this show. We had over 1,500 sold, and they started, like the Honeywell project, boycotting and trying to get Honeywell to stop making these anti-personnel mines and these CBU bomblets they were designed to have these little plastic pellets that would go in your skin so you couldn't detect them by x-rays, and they'd tear into your body, just all this insanity. And so then I went on to work with the day after I was working with the admirals and generals speaking out for peace in Washington, Center for Defense Information. And I made a film with Paul Newman called War Without Winners. And I also was the nuclear war researcher on the ABC special The Day After. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
Remember that, the power of that? And that was seen by 100 million Americans and 200 million in the Soviet Union. And it gave a visceral look of what nuclear war would look like. And I was basically, they were out there in Lawrence, Kansas, building sets and stuff. And I would be going to the Pentagon and doing research in Washington and faxing out to them the bomb damage affects different distances from the epicenter, so they could build accurate sets in different places. And I ended up getting nuclear war nightmares out of that. I was like, I would be, you'd wake up from a nightmare and you could say, oh, there aren't really monsters under the bed, but there were monsters under the bed and all around us that could, and it was a deep primordial fear. It's not just I could die, or me and my family, or me and my community. All life, all history, all art, all the species, all the dogs, cats, everything, all incinerated for some insane, crazy notion that this is somehow supposed to make us more secure.
So now you should see, this is why we need a Mars base, because one of the basic reasons, and this is not the driving reason, but one of the main reasons why we need to get off this rock to build a colony on Mars, to go into space, is because there's some small risk, for any variety of reasons, that life on Earth could end. It could be a nuclear war. It could be a meteor, a large object striking the Earth. It's only a matter of time. Maybe it's in the next 100 years, maybe it's the next million years, but at some point there's going to be some terrible event that will wreck life on this planet. And having a backup on Mars, and maybe going further, the brighter idea is, hey, you've seen all these science fiction films. There's an inspirational view of humanity expanding into space that's very positive. So I'm sorry, I think I cut you off though. Did you want to say more about your background, what you've done?
Well, yeah. So it's basically, I started this project with Garry Davis back in 2000 and developed, he had such an incredible story. He has this book, My Country is the World. And it so inspired me that it's so full of action and drama that I just had to make this movie. And I would urge everybody to come see it. Just go to theworldismycountry.com.
Wait, I think I have that
there where you can watch it. It's actually there's going to be a free screening at World Unity Week coming up on June 24th. There you can find right online where you can pay-per-view, and you'll see where it's on over 100 public television stations, PBS affiliates across the country. So yeah, you can find that. Yep, there's the picture, and we also have a weekly podcast, the People Powered Planet podcast, where we talk about the kind of ideas I'm talking to you about now. How do we build this people powered planet? How do we build something beyond the borders that divide us and beyond the insanity of this broken nation state system? How do we build a bottom up system that well, you call it an anarchism, but I call it an interactive world law of, by, and for the people.
So let me just address, because I keep seeing these comments. I don't think people realize this. The United States was founded in 1789, and it was the colonies for 100 plus years before that. We had open borders until roughly 1924.
Right.
It was effectively the case that anyone, there were a couple of rare exceptions starting in the late 1800s, but pretty much anyone could come from anywhere.
Absolutely.
For way over 100 years. There was a flood of immigration from, I think, Ireland and from Europe in the 1800s. And there were people here then who were saying, we don't want those people here. You know, the Irish were the Mexicans of today, right? I mean,
right.
There were the Poles, they hated the Poles, they hated the Irish. It's what's funny is I don't think my kids know what a WASP is.
Right.
I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. I don't think they know what a WASP is. My generation, there were WASPs, there were Jews, there were Poles, there were Italians. Jews weren't white, right? I mean, Irish were not white. Right? There were the WASPs, and we were like minorities. By the time I'm a fairly young, a kid, that pretty much went away. But there was certainly vestiges of that even in the 1970s. That we weren't really, this notion that I'm white wasn't really true when my grandfather came here in 1910. My grandfather was a Polish Jew. He wasn't white.
Right.
But I want people to understand that there's this notion that you can't have a country if you don't have border controls and control who enters your country. We didn't control who entered this country from 1789 to 1924. Our country grew, our country thrived. We accomplished great things. We overcame slavery and many problems. And the idea that somehow everything will fall apart if we have open borders is propaganda that's driven by people who want you to be afraid of someone else.
Absolutely. You put your finger right on it. Good for you. That's absolutely true. And you've also stated so well that the problem that we are trying to save ourselves from borders of everybody wanting to come in is being caused by those very borders and the wars that are forcing all the displacement and the environmental policies that are forcing the displacement. So yes, we the people can have a great future if we come together as humanity and rise above these borders that are dividing us.
So you said, I'm curious what you said about fixing the problems on the earth. I think there's a lot of people who are trying to fix things on earth in a variety of ways. Do you really think it's a bad idea to travel into space?
Oh, no, not at all. I think it's a good idea, but I just don't think it's sufficient. Yeah, absolutely. If it would be nice to know, not that comforting, that if we blew up the 7 billion people here, there were, 500 or 1,000 people still living on another planet that hopefully might be able to thrive there. But
the goal is
difficult.
Just be clear, the goal is 1 million people on Mars.
Okay.
That 1,000 people would not be a self-sustaining colony.
Right.
The goal in the short run, at least, is to get 1 million people to Mars, which sounds crazy, but is more. If you think about it, imagine you were in Europe in 1500 and somebody said, we're going to move 300 million people over to the Americas. They would think you're crazy. How the hell are you going to do that? But there's probably, was there 500 million or I don't think we have 1 billion people in the Americas, but we're way over 500 million between the US and Brazil alone. If you told somebody in Europe in 1500 that we were going to have 500 million people living in the Americas, they would think you were crazy. So, and although we see Mars as a very difficult journey today. The journey from Europe to America was a very difficult journey in 1500.
Yeah.
Right. So
I like your parallels, but the problem is, we're talking about trying to, take an incredibly inhospitable environment and try to change that planet with terraforming or whatever, and try to make it hospitable. It's a huge, huge task. And to me, I would put our effort in the other part of what Musk was talking about: how to make this our own planet livable. How do we, the people, rise above these nations that are dividing us, and create the livable planet that we want, and enforce law above the nations. If nations are going to do the wrong thing that's destroying us, we take away all the source of their power. All these people have power because they're getting their money from us, from our pocketbooks. They're getting their votes from us. We and I think one reason why people struggle so hard to fix things that it's not working is they keep struggling inside this broken system. Oh my God, well, just lobby Congress to do this or that. And 75 years after the bomb, there've been a few improvements, but we're still on the way to a new arms race, still destroying our environment and so on. And I think it's time for us to wake up and say, we're not going to, it's what Einstein said: you never solve a problem inside the system that created it. You have to create something new outside of it. Bucky Fuller said it: you don't solve problems by fighting the old model. You create something new and attract people to it. What we're working on in the People Powered Planet is, how do we create this new model? How do we attract people to it? And I think that we're kind of wasting. I mean, you need it for temporary holding back some of these forces that are destroying us, to do some things within that broken nation state system, lobbying Congress or whatever. But our big focus for me needs to be on, how do we create something more powerful beyond it, that is the interconnection of the people of this planet, and that unleashes the really new sleeping giant superpower, that is when all the people of the world recognize what you said, that we're all connected. We all want the same things. We're in these Zoom conferences are a great example. But say you're having this Zoom conference and you had Arabs and Israelis in it, and if you're saying, okay, who's right and who's wrong, you're going to clash. But if you said, okay, each person, tell your story, and what is it that you would really like for your children? What kind of future do you visualize? You start coming together. And there are many films where this has happened. Of Many is one that where Arab and Israeli students were at it with each other, but then Katrina happened and they got on buses together to go help Katrina, and they started saying, oh, I wish all Jews were like you. I wish all Arabs were like you. We get to know each other. And I think that we, the people, have the power to fix our world, and we just have to create an interactive system that does it. It's these old broken systems that are destroying us, and we have to invent something new. Humanity is an inventive species. Let's get the great minds like Elon Musk to help us invent a new way that we, the people, can interactively govern our world.
Do you think, I'm going to say, the Arab-Israeli conflict, what used to be a substantial conflict, and I think it's Northern Ireland, the India-Pakistan conflict, aren't these conflicts really conflicts between who gets the power to govern others, rather than a conflict between the people and how they want to live their lives?
Absolutely. India and Pakistan have lots of similarity. They have cultural differences, families across it, and so on. And yet right now, even a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan would wipe out life as we know it on Earth. Think about it. The meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs was 10 miles in diameter. Now, how many dinosaurs can you kill in 10 miles? But the soot and pollution that was thrown into the air enveloped the earth, blocked out the sun, crops couldn't grow. All the food chain worked its way down the whole food chain, and these huge, powerful, mighty, forceful, amazing animals all died because of global warming, basically. And a nuclear war is a way to instantly create the global warming that would destroy us. We're doing it the slow way with all these other environmental problems, but it's all based around kind of a broken system that we, the people, need to rise above and create the world we choose.
So I feel like you and I agree on a lot. And I feel like the thing that I'm seeing with COVID, and the thing I see with what I see in the chat right now, the people who are like, we need to have borders, despite what I see differently, is driven by propaganda. And there's this, I would say probably the vast majority of the population of the United States believes that we need to have controlled borders, believes that we need to have a military. And they're completely unaware, by the way. Let me ask you this question. Because I ask this question all the time, and the response is usually blank stare. How many countries do you think we have troops in?
Well, we have in most of the countries of the world. I don't remember the exact figure, but we've got troops stationed in bases all around the world, and not often taking over indigenous lands, other things. Not something that's serving us or the people, and not something that's really giving us any real power. It doesn't make us any more secure. How many?
So,
How many?
The answer is 177 out of 192.
Right, almost
or so 196. I forget the number. So, but I ask people this question, and I usually get a blank stare, and then I ask them the next question. Well, how many countries do you think we should have troops in, and can you name one and tell me why? And again, I get blank stares, and they'll stammer around. And the one that probably gets the most, I almost never get an answer, but when I get an answer, probably the most common one is, we need troops in South Korea to defend South Korea from North Korea. I'm like, okay, now I'm just going to engage. I hope you'll endure this comment from me, but South Korea's GDP is 100 times the GDP of North Korea. North Korea is surrounded by South Korea, Japan, China, and Russia. And South Korea is the smallest of its neighbors, and it has 100 times the economy of North Korea. If you ever seen a satellite photo of the Korean peninsula at night, South Korean peninsula is lit up, the North Korean part of the peninsula is dark. The average South Korean male is like 6 foot tall and 180 pounds. The average North Korean male is like 5'2" and 120 pounds. They're starving. They're poor. They have terrible tech. They have trouble making steel. South Korea makes the most advanced technology in the world. If there was actually a war between South Korea and North Korea, South Korea would win in a day. And people think we need to have tens of thousands of troops in South Korea to defend South. It's like saying we need to defend Rhode Island from Texas from Rhode Island.
Right. Well,
it's absurd.
You're absolutely right. And that whole war, which, here's this war that was fought. It was never won. It's still the war is still actively there. There's never a peace treaty. We tore apart. Outside powers tore apart a country that really wants to be united. There's this wonderful film about women crossing DMZ who came together, and the people of North and South Korea want to come together. But we make this boogeyman out of this scared little guy who's gotten this power only because of the whole world focusing on how horrible he is, and that gives him his power. The more you fight an evil, the more you create it. We create terrorism by fighting terrorism. We create this evil. That wouldn't even exist if the outside powers hadn't imposed this division and drew a line on a map. People didn't choose this map. This isn't a real division. It's one of these fake divisions that was made up. And we made up this division, and we caused all these problems, and all the sanctions and everything else just feed into it even more. And the whole idea that somehow you can punish and torture and fight people into submission, and that'll get you security, it never works. Yeah. Here you have this incredibly super greater power doing this to these little people, and the more you fight harder. When America fought the British, we know the same thing. The more when we send troops to another country like Vietnam, the reason we can't beat them is because they're fighting in their own country. They're fighting for their own people. And we say, oh, these are the evil communists. It's going to be a domino. It's going to take over the world. And we make up these false stories that aren't real. And the terrorists, they like it. They like, oh God, they're giving us all this power. They're saying we can do all this stuff. So let's do a beheading on YouTube and, give ourselves more power and get it out there. So we're creating these enemies. We're creating enemies, as you said, and then we have to fight them. And you're absolutely right. The whole thing is just making only profiting from it is the corporations, that
the military industrial complex.
Yeah. And that's not serving any of us. They're not creating anything that's making our life better on Earth, and they're robbing us. Back in the early 50s, there was like a vision. We'd have an abundant society, and we'd have leisure time, and we'd have all these models, and all that went away because we sucked it all into this military industrial complex and into fighting ourselves. I mean, what crazy species would spend the vast majority of its resources killing its own species and destroying itself? When you step out and look at outer space, if there are beings on other planets, they must be really scratching. What kind of a low species is this?
I think that there are animals, and there are, like, apes may kill each other too. But I'm a
Well, not
libertarian,
that
and
throw
our
off
cat.
their species, not that put all their effort into ways to do their own species in. I mean,
Right.
there was a great cartoon. I remember, I guess Art Cobb. He had this guy with a plunger and a wire thing to blow up his head, and all these wondrous animals standing around. It had man demonstrating his superiority over animals. He's about to blow up his head, and all these animals are gaping at him in wonder. I mean, what kind of a species is it that puts all its resources and how to off ourselves?
So I want to head back to this propaganda point for a second, or how do we reach people? One of the other questions I like to ask people is, because this is like, people don't like my position on the border, and, well, just don't cross illegally and there won't be a problem. It's like, well, how many people do you think the federal government should kill every year? Right? What's your goal? Your policy views, if your policies reviews were followed, how many people what kind of policy scheme do you want? And how many people would that kill a year? And everyone likes to believe that they want a policy scheme that would kill zero, but they keep supporting, there's something like, I think it's under 1,000, but there's roughly 1,000 people a year who die trying to enter the United States. And I think similar for Europe, that people are fleeing oppression and economic collapse in Africa and the Middle East, and they try to flee to Europe and they drown in the Mediterranean or something along those lines. Our border controls kill people. Our drug policy our policy against making drugs illegal kills people.
Right.
And our bombing, there's, of course, our bombing campaigns kill people. We have all these policies where we kill lots of people. But this is my question to you.
Well, there's actually an excellent Netflix series called I think it's called the Immigrants. I think it's called Immigrant Nation. I think it's called. And anyway, they showed how the Border Patrol purposely, like, they'll kick over and destroy bottles of water that volunteers have set up to help people coming over, because they want people to die, because they think that's a deterrent. They're trying to. They want kids to get tortured. They want the message to come home. Oh, look, if we go there, kids are going to be ripped away from us. They're going to be tortured. We're going to die. And so, yeah. But this whole, what the basic problem is? We've been fed this myth. We've been fed this myth in story after story that the story goes this way. There's this poor damsel in distress, and it's hopeless. There's this evil, a horrible villain that can't be, that's doing this awful stuff. So finally, a hero comes along, and at first he reluctantly, but he has no choice. He has to destroy the bad guy. He destroys the bad guy, rides off into the sunset with the girl, and everything's hunky dory. And that's the story we've been told. But in real life, it doesn't happen that way. In real life, the more you start, killing bad guys, the more bad guys you create. And how many people do you know actually solve their problems by killing bad guys? What actually kills bad guys, what actually gets rid of enmity is, and it's actually something, it's a slightly religious, but it's also in all religions. All religions have said this. Jesus said, love your enemy. Well, that's the only thing that can really vanquish an enemy. What happened to our terrible Japanese and German enemy? Well, we had a Marshall Plan. We helped build up their economy. They became our friends. People I know in Japan said, we were so honored that we were treated that way instead of tortured, that we felt we had to really struggle to make a economy and make products that could help the world. We turned enemies into friends, and that's the only way you get rid of an enemy. You never get rid of them by killing them, because then their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, they're all going to become your enemy. So there's this weak force in the world that we've been fooled. Movie after movie tries to tell us that the hero with the big gun is powerful. They're weak, folks. There's not a real power there. There's no power to the gun. The gun can destroy, but it can't build a better world. It can't build the future we want. And people have to start demystifying this idea that somehow there's power in guns and bombs and oppression and borders and punishing bad guys. I mean, same thing with prisons. The more you punish people, the more crime you create. There's other countries like Sweden and so on, where or other countries sort of have integrated people who've committed crime and working in society and interactive approaches, and people become prospering, contributing citizens, and they turn it around. But the more you have punishing prisons, and the more you oppress people, the more you create more anger and more enemies. So we've got this whole basic story wrong in our society. We've got a new story, And we, the people, have to ignite a new story that'll enlighten humanity. And that's kind of my mission in the world, create a new story.
So I feel like Garry and you have been on this mission for a long time. And I feel like to some extent, I'm on this, we're talking different things, but we're still on the same mission in a sense, which is, how do we reach people? There's so many people. There's people in the chat. There's my friends that I talk to. I honestly, a lot of my friends just think I'm crazy when I talk about this stuff, right? When I just ask the simplest question, how many countries do you think we should have troops in, or how many countries should we be bombing, or how many people should government kill? It's like, it's not in the approved topics of discussion, and people just close their ears and look away. How do we reach people who don't get it? I mean, Garry, your documentary, I think, delivers that. This documentary Exodus that I mentioned on PBS delivers it. But it's almost like there's this drumbeat of propaganda that is force-fed into people. How do you and I and people who think like us overcome that and reach more people and bring more people over to the idea that governments using force are the problem, and we need open borders? I don't know about the world law concept. I don't know if you can quite win me over to that one, because I fear that's just creating another government with more power. But, fundamentally, there are people who don't recognize that there are causes to war. There are causes of man's inhumanity to man, and they largely reside in governments. Mm-hmm. Not to say that there's no problems outside of it, but how do we reach people?
Well, I think you're right. And I'm doing it with my movie. You're doing it with your show. We need to do that. But let me talk to you a little bit more about law. Okay. If you have a system where you just say, anything goes, you can, say you have a city and there's no law, there's no mayor, there's no city council, there's nothing, and so how do we protect our borough from the other borough? Well, we fight a war with them. We lob bombs over. We try to keep away. I mean, the whole city could just break up. I mean, when you have a system where people do have a mayor and a city council, and when they have a system of law, what if criminals? It's the old Hatfields and McCords. What if the only way you could deal with, somebody killed my brother, okay, I'm going to go out and kill their brothers and their friends, and they're going to kill you, and you're going to retaliate. I mean, if you had no law, nothing to appeal to, no way to bring anybody to justice. We want to try to bring these government leaders who do oppressive things to justice, but we have to have a court to be able to do it. We have to be able to have a system, and the system doesn't have to be oppression. I mean, on our podcast, we had this wonderful police chief. He had been police chief of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then he went over to work with Bosnia and Serbia, and he worked with warring tribes, police forces who had been killing each other during the ethnic cleansing and everything. And he had to bring them together and meld them into one powerful police force that went from being the least appreciated society to being the most honored institution. And he did it in interesting ways. He said, okay, the Bosnian members of our police force are going to be able to pick the Serbian members. The Serbians will pick which Bosnians can be a part of it. And he worked with them in interactive ways to create a healing force, a peace force. I'm in a Rotary E-Club of World Peace, and there's a Police to Peace program where we're teaching about police could be serving people instead of oppressing people. And what we need is a system of law that's a service to humanity. It's a service, as I mentioned, with ICANN and with the Postal Union, and with, we need a service that if you didn't have a law that ICANN creates, if anybody could create any old email, it would never work. We'd never get to each other. You need a system. I would actually call it an Earth operating system. An interactive way of regulating what works for humanity.
Let me disagree with you there for a second. You mentioned the Hatfields and McCoys. That was in a period of time when there was not a lot of law. There was not a lot of government. And the Hatfields and McCoys were a rare case. It wasn't common. And I would say, yes, in a relatively lawless or in a system where you have relatively little government, there is the potential for more crime. But that denies the potential for social institutions that don't use government force to regulate behavior. And it ignores the consequence that when you give government as much power as we have given it, then sometimes governments go bad and they kill millions of people. And I'm much more afraid of governments killing millions. I mean, you've mentioned it a couple of times, the danger of us having an all-out nuclear war, or even a small nuclear war that could destroy the planet. Well, the way if governments didn't have that power, that if they weren't able to steal all money from the taxpayers, they wouldn't have been able to build the nuclear bombs.
Right. How many people would contribute? All right, we're going to hold a bake sale. We're going to raise some money to make a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I'm not chipping in on that. But, you know, I'm struggling with this fundamental problem that I feel like I've been fighting my whole life. At a fairly young age, I became aware that the war on drugs was a disaster. And we've been propagandized to death about the evil drug lords and the evil drug warriors. And as a criminal defense lawyer, I've seen that the vast majority of what's going on in the drug trade is very poor people struggling to get by and breaking some law in order to get by. I never met a kingpin, right? I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I've handled hundreds, probably more than 1,000 drug cases. I never met a kingpin. I never saw a kingpin. I never had a client be an informant against a kingpin. The kingpins are a fiction that are manufactured by the government and Hollywood or whatever. But I've never been, I've been talking about the drug war for years. I believe we should legalize all drugs, full stop, everything. If you can walk into a liquor store and buy alcohol, you should be able to walk into a pharmacy and buy heroin. Like it or not, as terrible as it is, and I don't want to do heroin, but criminalizing it doesn't fix it. But I've been saying this till I've been blue in the face for 30 years now. And I'm just not reaching anybody.
In countries where they have actually legalized it, they find the use goes down because when they build systems of support for people, instead of punishing somebody who's on drugs, they have places they can reach out to get the support and help they need. I mean, I know from people in my own family that, you know, able to, for instance, join Alcoholics Anonymous, and that sense of community that draws you up. You know, punishing people for being on an abused substance doesn't work. That just makes it worse. It's this whole idea that somehow we can punish people into solving problems. So I think you and I really have a fundamental agreement. But the point is that what the basis of what law is that in our community, we come to an interactive decision of what are the guideposts, what are the regulations, what are the laws we want? Well, you can't go kill each other. You can't steal each other's stuff. Now, how do we enforce that? Well, you know, it doesn't have to be guns, bombs, cops. It can be, I mean, we had for a long time in England, the police never even carried guns. They were were hobbies, and you know,
Iceland, they do not carry guns.
Right.
The people are armed. The police are not in Iceland.
But what you do is you come to a situation, if you're not armed, you're less of a target. You're less likely to get killed. I had a friend who was teaching nonviolent alternatives to police at Guantanamo, and he said, for example, you know, you come upon a domestic situation and somebody's holding their spouse with a gun, you know, come closer and I'll kill her or him, whichever it is. And so he would walk in and he'd say, do I smell smoke? Did somebody leave the stove on? Is something on fire? And they, well, I don't know. I don't quite smell it. And, you know, we draw them out of their conflict into something else. Well, it must have been something from next door. Now, tell me what's going on here. You know, he would kind of diffuse the tension and get into other ways of doing things. I actually also developed a movie script for a movie called Astrocops Peace Engineers of the 21st Century. We had these futuristic peacekeepers who don't have any weapons to kill or destroy, but you know, things to distract, disarm, transform, gizmos and gadgets that can spark kids' imaginations with how do we bring about compliance with the things we need for society to function without punishing people, but with motivating them and finding out what's inside. I mean, the same thing you said about the drug people. Most criminals, there's somebody who's been, you know, they've been oppressed, abused, slashed out. You know, we have to get at the sources of these things, and punishment is not the answer. The answer is a healing society, and it does take. I mean, there do have to be rules and regulations of what's right. I mean, it's not okay to go around, kill people, murder people, steal their stuff. So we have to create the rules, and then we have to create a way that we enforce those interactively, not with top-down governance, but interactive governance of the people, where we withdraw support for what doesn't work and we support what does work.
But I'm still stuck on this question of how do we reach the people who don't see it? And I see you maybe inaccurately as being at least on the fringe of Hollywood, and that Hollywood is filled with people who probably largely share our views that war is bad. We shouldn't be bombing other countries. The drug war is wrong. you do see movies like Traffic. I think that was it wasn't Martin Sheen. I think it was Michael Douglas. We do see a lot of Hollywood movies that sort of give you the hint in the writing and the portrayals that government can be evil. And how is it possible that there's a group of people in Hollywood who could get behind this message that, hey, maybe we should stop bombing? I mean, even like Elon Musk, like I'm the one of the world's biggest Elon Musk fans, but SpaceX is a military contractor, right? They're helping launch military payloads into space. They're working on this system to use Starship Earth to Earth to be able to transport payloads, ideally passengers and commercial transport, to be able to fly from Los Angeles to Shanghai in half an hour instead of 14 hours. But they're also talking to the military about being able to deliver military payloads from point A to point B on Earth in a half an hour. And I would prefer that SpaceX was not doing and not helping the military prepare to destroy the world, right? But I accept that Elon has to compromise. Number one, maybe he just doesn't see it the same way. Number two, in order to do what he wants to do to save the planet, he has to go along with the military on some things to make it work. But how do we I'm really struggling with this question, how to reach more people?
Great question. And my vision is, and I would love, as you mentioned, to pull together the right people in Hollywood, because a lot of them are very positively motivated. I would love to get people together working on creating an interactive vision of a world that works. We've had plenty of, I was part of, as I said, creating the day after that warned the people of the terrible problem. But once people realized the problem's terrible, or we don't want it to happen, they still didn't have a vision of what do we want to move toward. Everybody knows what they're against, but they don't know what we want to move toward. Now, I would love to create first a series, maybe starting as a Netflix series or something, but then moving into being a transmedia project that had all the games and gizmos and toys, but basically where each week we dwell in a future that works, a future where we the people are interactively.
Wait, that's a good title. A future that works.
A future that works, exactly. And that we have to create that vision, because without vision, the people perish. And what we need is a vision of what works. And Hollywood's been pretty darn good at creating terrible visions of the apocalypse we're heading toward. But, I said to Paul Newman, after we did the day after, Paul Newman and Joanne came into my office and they said, well, Kanegis, what next? And I told them that, well, I'll go back a little bit into the spiritual side of this. I was, after we did the day after, and it did have an impact, Ronald Reagan said it convinced him that he had to start the START talks, that his generals were lying to him and they said we could fight and win a nuclear war. So it had an impact, but still 75 years later, the arms race goes on. We're talking about new arms races with the Soviet Union and China. It didn't stop it because fear isn't a powerful motive. Fear will make you temporarily not burn your finger, but it won't teach you how to, turn off the gas main that's creating these fires. It won't teach you how to get to a fundamental change. We need a vision of what we want to move towards. So I said to Paul, actually, I had been meditating in Friends meeting, and it came to me that just scaring people wasn't enough, and that a whole vision sort of came of creating this futuristic, fun, exciting future where we're interactively solving the problems of the planet. And it actually went back to in my meditation, I went back to a song that we had learned as kids in Friends meeting, and it's the George Fox song, and it says, "There's an ocean of darkness, and I drowned in the night, till I came through the darkness to the ocean of light. And the light is forever, and the light makes us free. I will dwell in the glory of the light," said he. "Walk in the light wherever you may be." And it goes on. But the key point is that, yes, there is this ocean of darkness, and every rock you turn, everything you research, you find, as bad as that was, it's worse. And if you thought that was bad, it's 10 times worse. And oh my God, folks, it's even worse than that. And you can just drown in that ocean of darkness. And at the same time, you can look around, and everywhere people are helping their neighbors and other people. Flowers are growing, the ocean waves are flowing, nature is restoring itself. There's an incredible ocean of light. And I said, I'm just have to make a conscious choice that I'd rather dwell in that ocean of light. I mean, if we're wrong, and the world ends, there'll be no one left to say we told you so anyway. But if we're right, if we can create that vision of a world that works, if we can dwell on that light, if we can draw people to that, how much more chance we have that humanity will survive, that we can do it. Certainly without a goalpost and without a vision, we're not going to get there. So that's my big objective, is just what you said, to create a visionary film. I mean, Star Trek did it to a small degree. There were peacekeepers traveling across the universe, solving problems for people. But I'd like to see something right here on Earth where we picture how we build a world that works for everyone. And what Garry calls in the movie, the people-powered planet.
Mark in the chat, Mark is a moderator in the chat and a channel member. He said more solar and less oil will cut war. I'm not sure I agree with him, but it seems like a lot of our wars have been over resources. And Mark's point is, and this is a big Elon Musk thing, that, you know, if we deploy a lot of solar panels, if we deploy a lot of wind, and we deploy batteries to be able to, so that we still have electricity when the sun isn't shining, when the wind isn't blowing, that frees us from fossil fuels, which helps with the concerns about climate change. But it also, as a secondary benefit, means there's a lot less incentive to have wars over oil or other resources. So, but I'm not convinced that that's really the source of war. I think the source of war is really nations fighting over their power over land. And it's almost like they'll fight over nothing. That they doesn't have to be resources. They're fighting over who controls. I mean, it's not like the Israelis and the Arabs are fighting over a resource-rich piece of land.
Right.
Right. I don't think Northern Ireland was a fight over a resource-rich piece of land. I don't think Kashmir is a resource-rich piece of land. They're just fighting over who has power over land. And this is why I think we're kind of on the same page. We don't think that governments should exercise power over land. We think people should get along with each other and stop trying to control each other, and then we can all enjoy the land together.
Exactly. That once we come together with the people of the planet and realize the fiction of these borders that divide us, and get like this. There was one proposal that when mayors rule the world. I mean, inside cities, there you have real entities, and people are solving their problems, and they could interactively work with other mayors to help solve the problem. But there is I think that there's a great capability to turn this around if we can just get out of this of the broken thinking of we're thinking of ourselves in this box called nation states, and if we make that click in our head to being citizens of the world, then we have so much more power. We don't have to be stuck in how do we run ourselves ragged trying to fix this old broken system. We just create something better and new that we can all aspire to and rise toward, and I think that's our best hope.
So let's I think we're getting close to when I need to end this, and you probably have somewhere to go. So let me ask you this: how would you reassure people that a world government wouldn't end up becoming oppressive?
Well, I think you have to build right into the system the interactive nature of people being involved into an open source, publicly known, a way that builds it right into the architecture of it. It would be a longer talk than this, but I think we can get into it. Where it's first of all, because it has no guns and bombs, because it's just how we use our consumer power and our moral power. There's less incentive. I don't even see it as something that taxes. I see it as something that, for instance, say it's got a store as a part of it, and products which promote a better planet and stuff, they get a higher rating, and those that don't and are destructive and don't follow world law, they get a lower rating. And people are all buying things, and 5% of their sales cost goes into funding this system or something, and they're using it for products. I mean, I don't think it has to be a tax and a press system. It can be in a system that uses the new inventivity. It was an incredible advance in 1776 to think of government of and for and by the people, but there wasn't even a telephone. There was no way to communicate. You had to send people by horse and buggy to a distant city to govern for you. Well, Garry says nowadays we don't have to do that. We can all meet in the same room. And these systems that we hold so sacred, like representative democracy. We don't need a representative democracy. We don't need to put, Tweedledee or Tweedledum rule us, and every 51% lose and 51% win and 49% lose, and put somebody in power who's not really doing what we want. but just because that's better than the other guy, we have to create something that's more fundamental from the grassroots top from grassroots up, that really helps us bring out the best in all of us. And it doesn't need to be representative democracy or win-lose democracy. It can be this new synergistic system that Garry talks about, where synergy is even above the compromise. It's where together we interactively come up with something even better than any of us imagined when we first came into the conversation. And a synergistic system that brings to the top the best of humanity and what we want in the world rather than the worst. And if we can create that in the film, an ongoing TV show that brings that to life, makes it vibrant and real for people, I think we can help give the world a vision that can inspire us to build a better world. So I think you and I are on the same path, Warren. I'm really enjoying talking to you. Yes. And I hope we can get Elon Musk to watch this podcast.
I have a feeling this isn't going to reach Elon, but I really want to thank you. This is Arthur Kanegis. If you look in the background of his image, you can see theworldismycountry.com is the website for the documentary, The World Is My Country. I watched it. It's brilliant. I encourage people to watch it. I want to thank you for delivering that beautiful message.
And let me just say one more thing in closing. Look at this other image behind me, The Wizard of Oz. Garry Davis loved that story, The Wizard of Oz. You know why? Because Garry, by the way, passed away in 2013, and the New York Times had a front page obituary about him. He's an incredible guy, so do watch the movie. But what The Wizard of Oz made us realize is here she was on this incredible quest. We've got to find this mighty wizard who's going to save us. And we follow this path and that path, and we finally get there. And it's just some guy behind a curtain pulling strings, making illusions. And all along, the power was in her. All she had to do was click her heels together and she could go home. Well, we're in that situation. We're begging and pleading. We have to find the mighty, we have to get the right president in power. Somebody's going to save us. We have to elect somebody else. And we're knocking ourselves out trying to find this wizard who's going to save us, when all along the power is in us. The power is in us, the people. And that's what I think our fundamental nature is. And that's why I have that poster as well as the people-powered planet. So thank you, Warren. Thank you for letting us be part of this fun experience together.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience, and then I'll chat with you briefly before I let you go. So thanks everyone for watching. This is an out of character video for my channel. I don't expect to do another one like this. Next month, I'm going to be interviewing Dennis Kucinich, which will be another out of unusual version of what for this channel. But I really enjoyed talking to you. Hey, everybody, just remember, when we get to Mars, we're going to have a people-powered planet on Mars, at least. If we can't have one on Earth, we can have a people-powered planet on Mars.
Bravo, I'm all for it. Let's do it.
So thanks to the audience. And I'm going to end the stream, but I'll stay with you for a second, Arthur. So listen, thank you very much.